You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. Today, I have to say, I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Evans. Mark is the current, although not for much longer, Deputy Vice President of the Law Society of England and Wales. And the topic of conversation today on the podcast, quite specifically, is the agenda for the upcoming property conference that the Law Society is hosting in October, and what's happening over the course of the next 12 months at the Law Society. And this is particularly pertinent because you're an ex-property lawyer. So great to have some representation from this part of the sector as well at the Law Society. Thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Thanks, David, and thanks for having me.
Well, first question, very straightforward. Tell us about yourself and what you do now as well.
Okay, so obviously I'm Mark Evans. I have no family background in law. When I was growing up, I thought I wanted to be in North Wales Police. I wasn't tall enough. I then had a bit of a growth spurt in the sixth form, but by then I'd got a place to study law at Leicester Polytechnic. I was very fortunate. After finishing my law degree, I did my Law Society finals in Chester, and very fortunate to get a training contract in Wrexham in North Wales in 1993. I stayed at that firm for sort of 28 to 29 years, predominantly doing property and private client work, both residential and commercial property. In 2001, I decided to do something completely different, stepping out and resigning as a director, and I then joined the University of Law, and I'm now based in Manchester, but I also teach in Liverpool and Chester campuses, and I teach predominantly real estate now and private clients and professional skills, the conduct issues really. So whilst I'm not practicing in the property field anymore, I'm now teaching the solicitors of the future about what the world is for real estate lawyers that they're moving into. And lots have changed since when I started basically in 1993, not least the fact that when I started in practice, my secretary had a typewriter. We had no computer, no mobile phone, no email, and I think the world has moved on slightly since then.
Let's dive right into that first question. I described you as the current Deputy Vice President of the Law Society. Of course, not for a huge amount longer, because that handover period will start when Nick Emerson, current president, hands over. What's the process for that? What does that look like for you over the course of the next couple of weeks?
Obviously, you are elected as an office holder by the Law Society Council, and then it's a 3-year term that you take post for. So for the first year, I've been the Deputy Vice President, which roughly sort of equates to me equating sort of 25% of my time to Law Society work and sort of the rest of outside work. In October, at the annual general meeting, then basically I move up the ladder. I move into the position then of Vice President for the next 12 months. And then Richard Atkinson, who's the present Vice President, will then step into Nick Emerson's shoes and assume the role of presidency. So it's basically a 3-year role where you go 25%, 50% of your time, and then 100% of your time as the president. But the good thing about it is that we have regular meetings as office holders, so that we're aware of ongoing issues and live issues, so that it's a natural transition that we're moving into. It's not something that is just suddenly going to happen. And actually your workload within the society gradually increases as the months go by, and your commitments. Most of my commitments in the last 12 months have been here in the UK at local law societies and involved, whereas obviously the office holders at the presidential level often involve a lot of overseas travel and acting as ambassadors for the profession internationally.
So what's on your agenda? I suggested that it's been a little while since we've had property represented in the upper echelons of the presidency at the Law Society. What do you bring to the table? What do you think the Law Society should be working on over the course of the next 12, 24 months?
When Richard assumes office in October, the big thing that's on the agenda for the Law Society in 2025 is its bicentenary. So we are celebrating our 200 years of our, diverse profession. Richard obviously will have his own presidential plan, and clearly, it is for me as an office holder to support him in any way I can. But obviously, as office holders, we bring our own unique sort of skills and sets the situation. So Richard obviously is a criminal practitioner, whereas I'm a property practitioner, and Brett, who's following us as a DVP, is a civil practitioner. So we all basically are coming at it with different skill sets. So for me, what I'm looking forward to is ensuring that the voice of the conveyancers and the private client lawyers are heard at Chancery Lane, and that we, use it as an opportunity to really, be a bit positive about what work is going on there. I know there's lots of issues that we may be discussing in this podcast today where negativity can creep in, but on the whole, there's people doing fantastic work up and down the country in the property field, and I think that needs to be celebrated and highlighted, and that's one of the things I'm hoping to try and achieve.
Law Society Chief Executive Ian Jeffrey did an interview with Today's Conveyancer recently, in which he said the Law Society represents some 200,000 members. It's an incredibly broad church, isn't it, with lots of different views and opinions. And this was in the context of the conversation we were having about the TA6. But more broadly, this is about bringing a huge collection of people together and coalescing around something quite challenging, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing, but ultimately, solicitors at their core want to help people. They want to find solutions. There's a common theme, all solicitors want that to happen, and they may have differing views, and sometimes those views may be very strong, but even within your own firm and practice you will not get harmony. So to expect the Law Society to be able to convey a picture that is going to appease everybody, that's just not going to be possible. But there is going to be areas where we can find common ground, and there is going to be areas where we need to seek to support and promote the profession in every way that we can. Clearly, things have changed from when I started with social media and the internet and everything else that is now out there. And often some of the things that I read, the picture isn't actually accurate. And that can really change public opinion as well. And that's a challenge, is making sure not only are we doing a good job, but that the public perceive us to be doing a good job as well.
So let's move on to the property conference coming up in October. What's on the agenda for the conference? You've already identified the fact that we need the public to understand what the role of conveyancers is, for example, but I guess there's an internal element to some of the agenda as well. What's being covered this year?
Yeah, so there's the property conference. Obviously, is an annual conference. It's great basically for networking opportunities, and it's really a chance for the community to get together and look at issues that are sort of topical, look at issues that are potentially on the horizon, and also pick up on some of the more political issues, what's happening in legislation. And we must always remember that many of those issues are beyond our control. We can't impact what governments, whether it be UK government or Welsh government, are doing. We can try and lobby and influence, but obviously our role is to apply the law. So what's on the agenda? Well, clearly, we're going to be looking at a few topical issues, such as, the issues with climate change and sort of risk. And, we've already got a conveyancing practice note, how that needs to be updated or looked at. You touched upon it earlier, Dave, about, the TA6 consultation and developments and the residential property market. We're looking at things like, the green lease sort of toolkit, and in residential as well, hot topics about things like Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act. There's been some case law that's, relevant. Obviously, the previous government as well had plans to change certain things regarding ground rent and other issues that are topical. And then, of course, we've got the hot topics regarding, and I touched upon it before, technology, IT, and how the world is changing. And then, of course, to conclude, we're going to be looking at this sort of horizon scanning. What is out there? What can we foresee? Conveyancers don't sit in a pool by themselves. We're very much reliant upon a liaison and good communications with all the other people in the sector, whether that be mortgage brokers, lenders, estate agents, surveyors, financial advisors, everyone involved in the conveyancing process has a part to play. And sometimes that's where the difficulties can arise. We're not all running at the same speed. It's an exciting agenda packed with some fantastic speakers. So really looking forward to it.
Let's pick up on that point around horizon scanning and the challenges that the sector may well face over the course of the next 1, 3, 5, 10 years. Uniquely sort of positioned as a former practitioner yourself, and of course, as you say now, teaching on the topic. What do you in particular see as some of the key challenges that are coming up for the sector?
As lawyers, we need to pay particular attention to changes in legislation. With a new government, it'd be interesting to see in the next sort of 5 years what legislation is brought in. For me, obviously, as a North Walian and a past chair of the Wales Committee, I'm very conscious as well as to the divergence in law between England and Wales, and no more so than in the property sector. In my sort of 30 years now in conveyancing, I've seen transformational changes that, have come in, and, we're still in many ways in England and Wales uniform in that we still have the same land registry, we still have the same rules for VAT, and we're still sort of using the same sort of searches and surveys. But in many ways now, in the next 5 years, there is going to be a growing divergence between England and Wales. We have separate land transaction tax compared to stamp duty land tax. We have different planning and local authority rules, different environmental rules. Conveyancers are going to have to be adapting to whether they're buying a property in Wales or buying a property in England. And that's not taking into account all of the other factors that I mentioned about what could be UK legislation changing as well. So legislation changes are going to be huge. For us as a society, it's all about communicating and making sure that we offer education and learning opportunities for people to be debriefed, and that, that we can avoid negligence claims, basically, for giving the wrong advice. It is important that people are kept up to date with developments and that they, are sort of happy to be advising in certain areas of law. And that's one thing that's changed for me when I started in 1993. You now have specialist lawyers rather than general practitioners lawyers. Predominantly, you don't often now see a residential conveyancer who's also doing a family case, who's also doing a criminal case, because, it is a minefield out there now with the rules, the regulations, and that's not taking into account the issues regarding regulation. I think horizon scanning, it's an exciting 5 years ahead of us, with a government potentially that's set out its plans for big development, increased homes, changes which they mentioned when they were in government before, the consumer sort of focus that they may have as well. So it's an exciting time, and I'm keen to be, in my position at a very opportunist time as well for when these changes come about.
Over the past 5 years, the profession has lost a huge amount of talent and experience. Given the role that you have, particularly at the University of Law, can you provide any reassurance that we've got some really talented people coming through? Recruitment for firms is an absolute nightmare, is probably the most polite way of putting it.
Yeah. For me, one of the reasons I'm really enjoying my role as a lecturer at the university is to be able to sell to my students the careers they can have as a real estate lawyer or a property lawyer. And it is huge. Many of them come in with preconceptions of wanting to be litigators or, the glamour departments of court or family, whatever. And I've said, that, let's face it, we're all in our life going to either buy, rent or sell a property. And sadly, we're all going to die, so private client lawyers and property lawyers, we all need, whether we like it or not, there's going to be a role for that. And also, you get real satisfaction from the job from start to finish, and somebody moving in, whether it be to their commercial property or picking up their first keys, that phone call to allow them to do it. There is an absolute, benefit in that being done. So it's a fantastic career. I'm also saying to my students now that unlike maybe when I started, which was predominantly you only had one career path and that was going into a traditional high street or city firm, over 30 to 35% now of the legal profession work in-house. And many now opportunities exist for property lawyers in-house. So I'm saying to the students, you think about all these public limited companies now on the FTSE 100, many of them now have their in-house legal departments. Most of the, high streets have leases that need to be dealt with of their shops or their premises, or buying tower blocks or buying office blocks. So the opportunities there are immense, and with a growing population here in the UK, there is a demand. You can combine, for me, the skill of the law, but also it's that personal touch, relating to your clients and explaining to them what's good or bad about the property that they're buying and allowing them to make a choice as to what to go. So I'm certainly banging the drum for a career in real estate or property. And I'm glad to see that for those who are worried about the profession, there's some fantastic students coming through with a real keen knowledge to do it. Something that they can add that I possibly am lacking with my sort of dinosaur skills on technology. They're really looking at what the future may hold with technology and artificial intelligence. I may be more skeptical because of my age and never growing up with a computer or a mobile phone or a laptop, which is obviously something I've learned to acquire throughout my career rather than as a child. But it's interesting because I'm learning from them as well. And that's what's also assisting me in my role, because, I can test things with them and my students, and I'm 3 campuses which are diverse in Manchester, Liverpool and Chester, with a diverse range of students from all different types of backgrounds. And I'm learning, as I go along and what issues affect them. So for my horizon scanning, I'm in a good place, hopefully, to listen as to what's going on out there.
I know, for example, that there is an increasing focus of firms around how they utilize their tech as part of their recruitment message. So going back to what you said there about people coming into the profession and expecting to be able to use good quality technology to enable them to do their job is actually increasingly a recruitment tool. So I take the point there. Can I ask, and I don't know whether you'll appreciate this question or not, Mark, do you think that the curriculum is robust enough? Are we teaching these students everything they need to know about property? You go back to perhaps when you were training, you were taught unregistered land, you were taught much more about leasehold as well. Are we hamstringing these people before they even start?
I mean, I can only talk really from my own perspective as a lecturer, and I do teach on the undergraduate course, the LLB. I teach on the conversion course, the PGDL and MA courses. But for those entering the solicitor's profession, I obviously teach on the legal practice course and on the SQE1 and on the SQE2. So I can see, I've got experience as to what the legal practice course is offering for real estate and professional skills. And I also can see what is being covered on the SQE1 and the SQE2. And you're quite right, you're only limited as to what you can teach in real estate. in the sessions that you have got. So I think, what we're teaching is a grounding, is an understanding of the topic. And that's what I said to you before, that I think, sometimes employers need to be aware that education is ongoing and continuous. And I think sometimes they view maybe whether it's a paralegal or as a trainee, that their knowledge should be higher than what it possibly is. Because we're not teaching, and covering the areas that you are necessarily always doing in practice. We're covering the basics, which is essential. But, as I say, as a trainee or as a paralegal, and even throughout your career, you're always going to be learning. So for us, one of the things that is essential, whether it be through local law societies or the National Society or with external course providers or whatever, is ongoing education. Keeping abreast of developments, keeping up to date with the legal market, no more so than in conveyancing. I can see your concern. I can see why people are saying it. And I, for myself, could never really fully understand why my trainee could never draft and epitome a title. And, that could be frustrating. And I feel a bit sorry now as to how may I have reacted at that time many years ago. But I can now see it from the other side. It's a lot to cover in the courses on SQE and on the legal practice course. All I would say to any employer or anyone who's looking out there is you've got to really set the tone for your staff on their training plans and their experience, and no more so than where you put people. I've always been a great believer of having people in the room with me, listening to me, sharing what I'm doing, rather than being in a room on their own or remote. And that's changed things as well with the training over the last few years, sadly. And that's put pressures on training principals and people as to how that's supervised and how that's done. But I'm very much a hands-on person. I like for people to experience what's going on and learn from that.
One of the phrases I've certainly heard is this learning by osmosis, the idea that you're learning from people that you're perhaps sat opposite or sat with in the same room. And you've alluded to the fact that, post-COVID, we've got lots of home working and there's lots of benefits to that. But I wholeheartedly understand that, a lot of firms are increasingly saying to their staff, look, we need you in the office, because that's how we can train you. That's how you learn. It's by tapping into the expertise of other people. We are pretty much out of time on the podcast, but I can't let you go without asking you about the consultation. We've now had the timeline from the Law Society as well on what that looks like. Any comments really that you might make around engagement, Mark, and reassuring again the profession that this is something the Law Society is really taking seriously?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I have an experience as a property lawyer. I clearly can see that the issues that have arisen with the new TA6 form. I obviously chaired a special general meeting recently at the Law Society. And one of the key things I wanted to stress really is how dignified all conveyancers were who participated in that meeting were, and how collaborative, everyone has been. And I think for me, moving forward, for a long time, the Law Society has been looking at its structure, whether it be with committees and council, and you alluded on the fact that we have over 200,000 members. One of the things, obviously, we're looking at the future is getting more people involved. And this sort of get involved policy, where maybe on ad hoc basis or sort of certain things, we can get feedback from our membership quickly to make sure that we're in tune and we're aligned with things. And what's really pleasing about the consultation, we've got over 1,200 people signed up now. So we're going to be able to gauge a good view of where people are on a wide range of topics. And then we'll be able to assess it and then really focus on where we need to be looking in the next 12 months and beyond. And there's some big topics out there. So, this consultation is, I'm really pleased with everyone who's got involved. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, and everyone's opinion should be respected, which I wholeheartedly agree. I know within people's own firms there's differences of opinion as well as to how conveyancing should or shouldn't be done, and there's the hot topic which we've not touched upon about referral fees, and things of that nature. But for me, the more input we can have, the better. I'm really looking forward to being involved in the coming months in this consultation.
We're out of time. It's been great to have you on the podcast, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. Property conference date, remind me, when is it?
Okay, so the property conference is Wednesday, 16th of October, 2024.
And tickets are available on the Law Society website.
They are.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. I'm rather hoping that over the course of your vice presidency and presidency, we may well be able to get you back on the podcast and grill you further. But for now, thank you very much indeed for joining, Mark.
Thanks, David. Look forward to our next meeting.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to Mark. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.